Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. I'm your host, Royce White. I am here at Free People Radio in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The day is March 1st, the year of our Lord 2023. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started today with our news and current events episode for the week. This Friday, I'm excited to announce that our family and friends guest will be the great Dr. Scott Jensen. Dr. Scott Jensen, if you're unfamiliar, was the doctor who challenged, or gained prominence, or went viral, or got a lot of notoriety challenging the narrative around the pandemic. And eventually put a bid in to run for governor here in the state of Minnesota against Governor Tim Walz, incumbent Governor Tim Walz, and he was not victorious in that recent election. But nonetheless, he put up a great campaign, and he was able to run on a platform where he openly challenged the pandemic narrative. So I'm excited to have Dr. Scott Jensen. We will have him in the studio, so we'll be another episode format or another podcast format like the one with AJ. And look, I always like the in-person interviews better. I think they have a better dynamic, a better conversation, a better feel, and ultimately gives a better end result. Not that I don't like the Skype interviews; they're fine, but the technical part is always an obstacle. To have two people in the studio together is great for a podcast. So we'll have the great Dr. Scott Jensen in on Friday for you, and here we go, episode 11. Also, I want to say to reiterate, we're available on all platforms as of right now. We did have a little bit of trouble on Monday night with our episode not processing for around 8 hours, I would say. Never has happened to us before, hasn't happened to us yet. This was the first time. We sent correspondence to YouTube's support team, and eventually, as many of you know who watched the episode ended up premiering around 11:30 or midnight Central Time. So for all of those who stuck in there and kept track and stayed tuned and decided to follow when the episode finally premiered, we obviously appreciate that. And for all of those who, watched the day after or in the hours to come, we appreciate that. And by and large, we appreciate all the new subscribers, all of the new listeners and viewers of the podcast. We're trying to get this ship up to altitude. I think we're doing a great job so far, but we could still use your help. Please like and subscribe to the channel and comment. I don't care what you comment. Say hi, say hey, say where you're watching from. Disagree, tell me I'm an idiot. Doesn't matter to me. Just comment if you can, if you would be so kind. We are also available on all major audio platforms. That's Apple, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. We are backing up all the episodes on Rumble. There is an episode backup on our BitChute. We are also looking into getting our content up on Twitch in the near future. And I have just begun to look into Odyssey as another backup platform because who knows? I mean, everybody who speaks the truth. Everybody who speaks the truth has numbered days on big tech platforms, especially YouTube. And I even believe Dr. Scott Jensen may have been censored from YouTube at one point. I think I remember hearing that. I know he was censored from a number of platforms at some point in time. I don't know if he remained censored or not, but I think I remember hearing that Dr. Scott Jensen was censored at a point in time. Along with a bunch of other doctors who have now slowly but surely been vindicated in their skepticism of the entire pandemic narrative and other things surrounding the pandemic that we'll get into, I'm sure, on Friday with Scott Jensen. So that's interesting. I mean, Friday's episode may be pulled down. Maybe we have trouble again getting our episode processed. I don't foresee it. Hopefully, it was just a high traffic situation, but obviously the titles of all of our podcasts so far certainly would flag as controversial at the very least, but but dangerous misinformation in some people's eyes. So we're going straight down the pipe, and we appreciate everybody who's tuned in now to the podcast and continues to stay engaged for an hour and a half, 2 hours. When I started the podcast, I really was aiming to keep these episodes right around 90 minutes, and we've had trouble being able to do that. And I appreciate that the people who are watching and who are subscribing or listening, enjoy these longer formats and aren't throwing me the comments, stay on 90 minutes. It's getting too long. We've actually had a lot of people tune in and say, wish it would go longer. I couldn't possibly go longer. I have some other things and other engagements and commitments that I have to attend to. But, there will be those days where I just can't help myself and go longer. I had one person say Rush Limbaugh used to go for 4 hours, and Rush was a legend. Didn't agree with them on everything, but I think ultimately Rush was way ahead of his time when it comes to a lot of what we're seeing today. And we have to be able to retroactively go back and look at people who we may have disagreed with at formerly or at a different time in our life and say, you know what, man, that person ended up being so right. I got to reevaluate how I was looking at things at the time. And, when Rush was at his height, when Rush was huge, I was a young teenager, coming up in a culturally Democrat community. So I was listening to the tropes. I was listening to the zeitgeist about what and who a Rush Limbaugh represented. Once I got a little bit older and had my interaction with the corporatocracy and started to view things from a more global political lens, Rush Limbaugh became vindicated quickly. So thank you to everybody who's tuned into the podcast. Here we go again for another episode. And today I want to go right down the middle. I mean, on Monday, we got down about women and Marxism and Black women and this sort of cultural narrative that's been built around Black women. And I want to say, to start this episode, that was not an attack on Black women. That was extending a hand. I want to help. I want to help people see. I always loved the Leonardo da Vinci quote, learn the art of science, learn the science and art, and learn how to see, develop a complete mind. Such a great piece of wisdom, that everything connects to everything else. And that's not a we are the world sort of sentiment or idea. That's to say that we live in an interconnected world, that our decisions, our actions, our choices have ramifications for one another. And that doesn't abnegate or negate the individual, but it certainly places a premium on the way with which we look at the world. And Black women play an integral role in what we're going to talk about today, although we're not going to talk about Black women again, because I spent 2 hours railing on that situation. If you didn't see that, go check out Monday's episode. It's now up in its full quality. But understand how the global affects the local, and vice versa. The circumstance of Black women politically is a very localized, circumstance, especially American Black women. But we have to understand America's role on the world stage, certain political and philosophical ideologies' role on the world stage, and how those ideologies on the world stage draw upon the local or more localized culture, more localized mindsets, more localized information, or whatever you want to call it, to bolster those narratives and those agendas on the world stage. And again, we're moving towards a welfare state. We're moving towards a totalitarian state. We're moving towards an anti-God global governance. And we're going to show you some stark examples here today. And I want you to understand, as I talk about these more global politics today, that it draws back down on the narrative of minority groups, disenfranchised groups, marginalized groups, groups who have been oppressed, who need the protection of these types of authoritarian, ambitious, authoritarian, and totalitarian global governance agencies, global governing institutions. So I want to invite Black women to to come into the conversation and just have an open mind to how you're being used. I'm not saying you haven't been oppressed. I'm not saying you haven't been used, but understand there there are multiple parties out there that seek to use you, that find advantage in using you. That's not just white Christian Republican men, right? If you really want to be concerned about using women, using the identity of women for whatever nefarious purpose, we're going to show you some stark examples here today. And I want to start with probably the most dangerous, in my opinion. This is the most dangerous story. This is the most dangerous agenda out there today. You know, I talked early on in the podcast about the Fed and monetary policy, this inflation, this sort of war that's going on with currency, this currency war waged between countries, but also from one country towards its own citizens. And that's the circumstance here in America, or from a foreign authority that oversees our currency or monetary policy that is then waged against the citizen. That's globalism, right? Globalism is an attack on an attack on a nation and its citizens through socioeconomic pressure, socioeconomic and culture war, right? And that's what we're faced with today with our monetary policy and our monetary institutions, the Fed, the IMF, the World Bank, and so on and so forth. So we talked about the monetary policy and the dangers of monetary policy in the Fed, and then we also talked about the proposition of nuclear war with Russia. And let's say nuclear war with Russia as a conduit to World War III, right? As a conduit to a war in the Eurasian landmass, your war between Europe and Russia that involves the Middle East and will eventually affect Africa, and it has world ramifications. Certainly, we're already seeing them today, but an escalation of that conflict will certainly spill over into the entire world. But this may be the most dangerous story on today's across the world. I mean, for Americans, but anywhere, because again, America's existence, the spirit of America, our founding documents, our founding fathers and our founding documents and our founding ideals were a moment in time where a few profound men saw the dangers of economic imperialism and globalism or totalitarianism, one world government. They saw the dangers of that, and they outlined this very rare, unique document that gives power to the individual citizenship. It outlines what citizenship is, and within that, it gives a sanctified sort of power to that citizenship. Right? You have inalienable rights granted to you by the Creator, not by your government, not by another man, not by a consensus of other men. These rights were granted to you. They're inalienable from on high. And when I say on high, I don't mean a global corporatocracy or some medical totalitarian body. What I'm talking about is the highest, the most high, God. Okay. That was significant. That was significant. We as American citizens have to understand how significant that was, and we have to understand our role in protecting freedom, truly protecting freedom on the world stage, not democracy. See, democracy is a different thing. Somewhere in here, an info war was waged where we believe that democracy is a synonym for freedom. That's not true at all. You can have a tyrannical democracy. You can have a corrupt democracy. We see, and I talk about the four heresies of the West all the time, but I have to draw it in to talk right now. I mean, lines up perfectly. The scientific method, heresy 1. Democracy, heresy 2. Computer technology, AI, 3, 4. The four great heresies of the West. And we feel about democracy the same way that we feel about science, that science and democracy are always a net positive. Now, am I anti democracy? No. I think democracy has great utility, but I'm not under any false belief that any form of democracy, any and every form of democracy are a net positive, or that democracy is incorruptible. That's foolish. That's foolish. And that's what we have here today. We have this belief that democracy is what we're defending. We're not defending democracy. We're defending America, what we're supposed to be defending, or what our national identity calls for us to defend, is the little guy, the nation of shopkeepers, the individual citizen. We are a bastion of freedom for the entire world. And when we allowed it to become democracy, and then liberal democracy, and then the post-World War II democratic liberal order, that is just another way to say New World Order. And they actually, in fact, call it New World Order when they have their little Freudian slips in all of these, public press conferences. And now, it's rules-based order, rule of law, rules-based order for who we choose the rules to stand for. And that's the real danger of what we built. This story that we're going to get into first should alarm you more than anything. And it is Joe Biden and the Biden administration agreeing to sign over American citizens' rights to the World Health Organization in the wake of global health crisis, global health emergencies, pandemics. And we bring this article up here from the Epoch Times, which, the Epoch Times is on point sometimes. Sometimes they're not. Nobody's ever right all the time. And, none of these articles that we bring up, just as a preface, none of these articles that we bring up are a complete, what do I want to say, affirmation of the institutions or publications that are published in the articles that we use. But some of these are just facts. I mean, this is not, this particular article isn't an opinion piece. This is actual news coverage. And in this, it has the links. If anybody wants to go, all you have to type in probably to Google is Biden administration negotiates deal to give WHO authority over U.S. pandemic policies. And this article will pop up, and you'll be able to follow the links and the sources. I've done that myself in this article. Everything checks out. And this probably isn't a shock to many of you who are listening today. But it would be a shock to some, and then some would just outright deny that this has any merit whatsoever. And those are the people that we should be weary of. And those are the people who actually undermine democracy because they pretend like they have a real sound grasp of the things that are facing us as individuals, but also as communities and a nation, when really, in fact, they have no clue whatsoever. And they're actually willing to deny what's right before them. So here we go. The Epoch Times, Biden administration negotiates deal to give WHO authority over U.S. pandemic policies. New international health accord avoids necessary Senate approval. Let's scroll down a little bit. News analysis. The Biden administration is preparing to sign up the United States to a legally binding accord with the World Health Organization that experts say would give Geneva-based United Nations Health Agency the authority to dictate America's policies during a pandemic. Despite widespread criticism of the WHO's response to the COVID pandemic, which there was huge. First of all, we got to start by saying there was already huge criticism of the way the WHO responded to the pandemic in the first place. Like, aside from the fact that we should never abnegate our policies over to any global institution, any global governing institution. That aside, this specific institution was under huge criticism in how they responded to the pandemic by multiple countries. not just the right-wing radical Republican MAGA conspiracy theorists in America. The criticism of the WHO was widespread on the world stage. I mean, there was huge skepticism and criticism of how they dealt with the pandemic. I mean, that made it through the censorship. The criticism of the WHO actually is just right out there in the open for you to go and look at. So, U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra, I want to say his name is Becerra, joined with WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom. What is this guy's name? Ghebreyesus. Okay, maybe he's Ghebreyesus. In September 2022, to announce the U.S. WHO Strategic Dialogue. Together, they developed a platform to maximize the long-standing U.S. WHO partnership and to protect and promote the health of all people around the globe, including the American people. These discussions and others spawned the Zero Draft PDF, and here they have a link to the PDF, of a pandemic treaty published on February 1, which now seeks ratification by all 194 WHO member states, WHO member nations. A meeting of the WHO's intergovernmental negotiating body is scheduled for February 27th to work out the final terms, which members will then sign. And the reason why I bring you this story at the top of the docket today is because it's now March 1, and this meeting would have happened in the last 24 to 48 hours. And we'll see in the weeks to come what comes out of that, especially when it comes to America and our decision to sign up for this this treaty. I mean, this treaty is beyond unconstitutional. There is no constitutional merit to this treaty whatsoever. That's the first thing we got to get out of the way. This is unconstitutional. Okay, there is no. I mean, this is you could argue this is treason. You could argue this is treason, right? I mean, imagine if Donald Trump came out on the White House lawn and said, Congress, the Senate, who cares? They're out. I'm signing an executive order, or I'm signing over the control of America's government and policies to a foreign institution, a foreign body, and it doesn't matter what the Congress or the Senate has to say about it. I mean, could you imagine the outcry from everyone, from a lot of people, especially liberal, especially this liberal mainstream media? Can you imagine what the headlines would read? Imagine if we came into some unilateral collaborative with Russia around pandemics, and we gave over authority to some third party that arbitrates the alliance between us and Russia, and said, hey, when a pandemic breaks out, these people have emergency authority over the government. This is unconstitutional. And even furthermore than it being unconstitutional on face value, the real danger in it is that many people have a problem with how much influence the CCP and China have come to have over the World Health Organization. This isn't hidden. This is a more mainstream criticism of the WHO, that through funding, through an overall impulse and gravitation to the CCP and China being the center of the future, one belt, one road, as an example, but just being the center of the future from a manufacturing base, from a technology base, from a global interconnected economy base. China has come to hold huge sway over the World Health Organization, which is why people had criticism of the WHO's initial response, because many felt that the WHO was unwilling to definitively definitively outline or definitively say whether or not this virus originated there in Wuhan or came from the lab, or even that it was a possibility that it came from the lab, or even that it was a possibility that the pandemic originated in China and that China, was spreading to the rest of the world through China. Now, can I definitively say one way or another? No, I can't. I mean, I just, if you really get down to it at a granular level, it's completely possible that there are shadow groups within the security state here in America that are working at the behest of a global governance, which also work in collaboration with China, and they release this virus all around the world at the same time, or in sequence to make it look like it came from one place when really it spread all across the world in a coordinated effort. We have to be able to accept that this is a possibility. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but I'm saying it is a possibility. Certainly, matter of fact, when you really look at it, keeps me up at night because there's some real gravity to that theory. Why? Well, number one, because we have high level biological laboratories that deal with these types of contagious viruses all over the world. And in those labs, or those labs themselves, are connected through global governing agencies like the WHO. In fact, their inspections, their funding, their scientists are all in a network and sort of integrated and collaborative network where they work together and they trade in information all the time, which is also a matter of national security when you really think about it. And we'll get into more of that throughout the episode, but I just want to start to frame my thinking around these things for you. And hopefully the technocratic, totalitarian dictators over at YouTube will hear this and understand basic sane reason and logic that this is a possibility. Not saying that it is what happened, but it is a possibility. But what's also a possibility is that this virus originated right there in Wuhan, in the lab, where they were dealing specifically with mutated coronaviruses. It's very possible. In fact, it's likely. And Dr. Chris Martinson talked about the origin story of the Wuhan lab leak, and the gain of function research in and of itself, but how it pertained to this particular strain of coronavirus that started this pandemic 3 years ago. And many others, like Martinson as well, who are credentialed in biological science. I mean, these people have PhDs. They have doctorates in biological science and biology and epidemiology and the whole nine, cellular research. So they know what to look for. I mean, they're looking at the white papers and they're seeing a mutation of this virus that was not natural. And I think many people now have accepted that the virus was a result of some type of gain of function research and tampering. Now, it could be that when we say gain of function research, we're more talking about a formal academic scope environment where these international scientific collaboratives take these viruses for academic purposes, and they go in and they modulate, they modify certain certain gene sequences and things like that to try and test if a virus is more deadly in this regard, if it's more deadly in this regard, is the contagion higher or is the death rate higher? Does the virus burn quicker or does it burn slower? All these different things they say they want to test. And just to be honest, I'm against this in general. This is part of that heresy of the West, the scientific method. And when the scientific method and pathomania drive you into a place where you're shooting yourself in the foot. Okay? This is the arrogance of man. This whole gain of function research phenomenon signals the heresy of the West and scientific method and the arrogance of man, trying to bridge the gap between man, nature, and God through science. hard to do, especially hard to do without very strict moral guardrails, very, very wise moral guidance. Not to abandon science altogether, but to throw all of our eggs in the basket of science puts us in a place where now it's very hard for us to tell whether or not this virus came from within the scope of academic gain-of-function research or whether there is some shadow group, some nefarious group that let's say they know exactly what the gain-of-function research is. They came into that information and now they're going to replicate exactly what these people over here were working on for a nefarious purpose to infect the entire world or use it as a bioweapon. Who knows that they didn't want it to look like it came from China as a bioweapon to start a war between America and China? Who knows if China just didn't outright send us a bioweapon? We are now in the stage, the phase, the era of biological warfare. And while they say all of these researches like gain of function have academic purposes, we know that the academic institutions, our scientific academic institutions, are but just an extension of our military ambitions. This played out in World War II. If you don't understand this, you go back, you read the history of World War II, and you start to see that many of our academic institutions got their funding, got their guidance, got their marching orders from our government, who gave them grants and funding, who gave them grants, right? I mean, that's how the WHO gets funded. That's how the National Institute of Health gets funded. They get funded from federal grants. Those federal grants come usually through government agencies who say, hey, we got to be ahead of the curve when it comes to biological warfare because it's a potential threat. So our government has lined out that biological warfare is a potential threat. Our government, our security agencies have laid out that biological warfare is on the table. This isn't just right-wing MAGA, Donald Trump following conspiracy theorists. Because before there was ever a Donald Trump on the political scene, there was an Alex Jones, and Alex Jones has been covering this for a long time. Funny how they try to clip both of them out. Well, they're still trying to clip out Alex, and they're trying to throw Donald Trump in jail. I mean, this is what's taking place. But our government has laid out that biological warfare is a threat. But for some reason on YouTube, you can barely even say biological warfare without getting censored. I mean, just take that alone. And it starts to shape for you what we're dealing with here. And so it's my personal opinion that the CCP sent us a bioweapon. And not only that, but the CCP sent us a bioweapon in collaboration with some treasonous Western shadow groups, shadow agencies, elites, globalists, authoritarians, people who wanted to stress test the state of citizenship. Where is citizenship? What do people believe their rights really are? What are they willing to fight for? What are they willing to live by, fight for, and die for? And it's not by accident that China, the new center of the future, the center of this globalist ambition, the furnace, the engine on one belt, one road for this new global governance. The engine had a very similar COVID response to the other crown-based Commonwealth nations who went over and above this sort of radical authoritarian COVID response, right? You saw it in New Zealand. You saw it in Australia. You saw it in the UK. You saw it in Canada. Those are the 4 countries of the Five Eyes. And what do those 4 countries all have in common that the 5th country doesn't? The Five Eyes, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK, the United States. Those countries make up the security collaborative known as the Five Eyes. And it's worth it to tell you how the Five Eyes operate in the first place. The Five Eyes was originally instituted as a security collaborative to fight against the potential of terrorism or domestic threats by allowing the security agencies from fellow countries to spy on its citizens to to circumvent the individual constitutions or laws of that nation, and basically was made for America because America has by far the biggest population, and what they really did was our American government, our corrupt DC elites got together with these 4 other nations, came together as a security and surveillance collaborative known as the Five Eyes to say, hey, what Snowden did blew the whistle. And then, Snowden blew the whistle on us. We can know, and don't get me wrong, the Five Eyes was probably operating before Snowden in some type of collaborative effort, but certainly the surveillance had to change. The surveillance apparatus had to change their narrative and directive after Snowden blew the whistle. There was great damage control that needed to be done. And so what they're now doing, and they're doing it to this very day, right now, today. Oh, well, we're not spying on our own citizens. The British are spying on our citizens, and they just shared the information with us. Or the Australians are spying on our citizens, and they just share the information with us. Or the Canadians, or the New Zealand. It's just a way to circumvent the Constitution. So, and I bring that up to show you how the road was paved. The bricks were laid to introduce this type of WHO treaty or this WHO policy that had nothing to do with COVID. It had nothing to do with pandemics. This is the impulse and impetus of our elite, of our government, of our sort of authoritarian, totalitarian leaning government. This is the danger of imperialism. This is what the Constitution was trying to fight against. It was trying to be a bastion against. The Second Amendment, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, the right to speak out, to speak the truth, to speak your mind, to speak your beliefs, to speak out against tyranny. The Second Amendment, the right to physically bear arms and defend yourself against tyranny, against imperialism, against globalism, okay, against any type of corrupt majority rule. The Five Eyes was the spark. The surveillance community was our intelligence community. Our intelligence community was the infancy of this global ambition. So, we may have gotten a bioweapon from China and China alone, but don't think that anything that China is doing does not have collaborators here in the West or there in Europe. That would be foolish. One Belt, One Road will have a long trail of Western receipts. A great number of Western, American, European, Commonwealth, treasonous traitors and sellouts. And those black women I talked about in the beginning are so far from that transaction, it's scary. It's scary how far black women are from that transaction. Just to tie Monday back in. They're being used in the narrative. They're being put on the official political documents. Their names are being used as a way to secure this agenda. But they are so far removed from this transaction, they might as well be slaves again. And effectively, that's what they are. They've become slaves again. Psychologically, philosophically, politically. We vote 91% Democrat. We don't know nothing about bioweapons. We don't know anything about state surveillance. That's not in our purview. All we know is we should be able to go on OnlyFans and make money off of our own bodies and sexual transactions away from the oppression and tyranny of men, white men, or any man, really, any heterosexual man. That's what our political worldview is based on. We should make the same money for being a makeup artist that we do scaffolding, skyscrapers. We should make the same money in the WNBA as we do in the NBA. That's the purview of common American political thought. And what I'm talking about today is how countries really work, how countries and governance really works. Not how it works in the headlines, not how it works at your little group think tank, kumbaya, Judeo-Buddhist shaman circles, where you guys talk about veganism and climate change and cocaine and BDSM, eyes wide shut parties, or whatever it is you're doing. I don't know. I haven't been to one. I see them. I see you promoting them. I see the marijuana friendly yoga classes. Everybody in there is overweight. I don't know. I'm just watching. I'm just watching. I'm not saying you shouldn't do yoga or that marijuana is a net negative, because there are certainly other drugs out there, and we're going to talk a little bit about an Eli Lilly story today. Big Pharma certainly has things far more dangerous than marijuana, and I already told you benzodiazepines is one of them. Marijuana doesn't kill you. Benzodiazepines will, and benzodiazepines are given legally at mass to a lot of people. Marijuana is still illegal, and there's something about there is something to that. But marijuana is a gateway drug. Can be. A lot of times it is, by many own marijuana users' self-testimony. Marijuana is a gateway drug, right? And even more importantly, marijuana sort of has this way of numbing the mind or dimming the lights of the mind to where you still a drug, you still worry more about where am I going to get. I know this because I came up around people who smoke marijuana. Never did myself. First time I did, I had a massive panic attack, and I thank God for that. But people who smoke marijuana are constantly looking for that next marijuana high. And in between time, they do have those mood swings and mood changes that affect their daily life. There's no doubt about that. That's any drug. That could be marijuana. That could be a Snickers. And they're selling much more candy out there than they are marijuana. So sugar was the first drug. Sugar was the first drug trade. I'm just trying to show you how these things line up across time. Sugar was the first drug trade. Still the biggest drug trade, if you ask me. The hidden one, the one that's been normalized. Now it's dopamine. We've gone all the way from sugar to mainline dopamine. You got two in the same. Some people out there right now stuffing a Milky Way down their throat on TikTok. You probably don't know where you are in the world, and I understand. That's why I'm trying to bring some gravity back to your reality. So who knows? Who knows for sure? It's my opinion the CCP sent us a virus, a bioweapon, to stress test citizenship, to see where people were in terms of resisting tyranny. No greater example than this initiative that's being forwarded here by the Biden administration. Let's just give over all our rights. Let's give over all our rights to the World Health Organization, even though it's a common belief that the CCP in China have way too much influence over the World Health Organization. I mean, who even is the World Health Organization? Why should we trust them? Why should we trust them? What makes them legitimate? Where is the merit in the World Health Organization? Is it just because a number of nations, and understand this, when we say the World Health Organization, we're just talking about the United Nations. We told you how much of a scam the United Nations is. The United Nations is a neoliberal, war-based global governance. That's why the Security Council and the 5 nations on the Security Council can at any time veto the decisions of the General Assembly. The General Assembly are all the nations of the United Nations, 200 some nations, I think it is, 190, something like that. All the nations of the United Nations vote on a matter, and then if necessary, if they desire, the Security Council can veto that decision. Muammar Gaddafi's speech in 2009 at the United Nations summit was one of the most one of the most awe-inspiring speeches I think I've ever seen. Revelatory. Just laid everything out there. I mean, they killed him 14 months later. Hillary Clinton and Obama killed him 14 months later. This was after Obama was first elected. And Muammar Gaddafi goes up there and he says, "Man, I hope our African brother, our African brother Barack Hussein Obama, is a herald of change to come in America, and we want to wish our brother a warm welcome to the United Nations as the president of the United States and the free world." And then he goes on to just lay out how America's been corrupt for a long, long time, and not only America but the United Nations as a body, and these sort of wars that were waged in secret, and not that they were waged in secret, but they were waged under false pretenses, under a false premise, under false ruling. And the Iraq War was a great example, but the Afghanistan War was a great example. And Muammar, you just got to go look up the Muammar Gaddafi speech. Maybe on next Monday I'll pull up the speech and we can watch it here on the show, because I think it's actually that important of a speech. And now look, Muammar Gaddafi, this is all tied in. Muammar Gaddafi, he gets killed. What do they use? Oh, he was a rapist. Oh, he was a dictator. Oh, he was a tyrant. Oh, he was a murderer. He was a psychopath. He was this, that, and the third. But we were willing to play ball with him. Our security state helped Muammar Gaddafi come to power there in Libya. Why? Because the Iron Fist served the purposes to stabilize that part of the world, or that country in that region at that time. We were willing to play ball. Muammar Gaddafi stands up, gets gets a little too big for his britches, starts trying to separate and become independent from America, starts talking about the United Nations and the corruption of geopolitics. Bang, he gets clipped. Saddam went first. Same story. They used Saddam. They empowered Saddam. We put Saddam in power in Iraq. Everybody knows the story. We put Saddam in power in Iraq, and then when Saddam got a little too big for his britches, thought that he had enough resources and money and power to tell America, the security state, to go pound sand, clipped him, roped him into a war with 9/11 somehow. Roped him into a war with 9/11 that Iraq had virtually nothing to do with. Said that he had weapons of mass destruction, went there, we now know we didn't find any weapons of mass destruction. That's a foregone conclusion. That whole war was a racket. Rumsfeld, Cheney, same guys who lost what was it, $6 trillion that they lost, something like that. I think that we lost the Department of Defense under Cheney and Rumsfeld lost $6 trillion, some crazy number. Maybe it was $2 trillion, I don't know. Lost $1 trillion. Let's just call it $1 trillion at the low end. They lost $1 trillion. Lost it. Misplaced it. They don't know where it went. $1 trillion. To help put this into perspective, I want to go to a common example I use for people who have trouble with exponential math. 1,000,000 seconds is 11 days. 1,000,000 seconds is 11 days. 1,000,000,000 seconds is 31 years. 1,000,000 seconds is 11 days. 1,000,000,000 seconds is 31 years. They lost $1 trillion. Now, I know that seems like a small number because every other day we're getting bombarded with headlines from the media industrial complex that puts $1 trillion up in the headline like it's just a casual number. I mean, hey, another trillion we're signing. It's 400 billion. It's 600 billion. It's $1 trillion. No problem. No problem. It's just on your credit. It's just on your back. And if need be, on your blood and on your flesh and blood, when we send your son to fight a war in some skirmish over in some country that used to be allied with the Axis powers and the Nazis to maintain liberal democracy. And now that may feel like a tangent to you, but what I'm trying to show you is we empowered these people in these countries like Muammar and Saddam. And then they go up on the world stage like Muammar did at the United Nations Summit and says, this entire United Nations theater is a scam. And let me tell you the fundamentals of how it's a scam. And then we all see it and we accept the bullshit story that they had to kill Muammar Gaddafi because he was a radical tyrant, which he may have been in some respects, but that doesn't mean that's why we killed him. He may have been a radical tyrant. That does not mean that's why we killed him. So they kill him and we all go back to taking our marching orders from the United Nations. Part of the United Nations is the World Health Organization that is now going to be in charge of the entire country anytime a world health crisis begins. One that we are actually still in by this global governance's criteria. We're still in the pandemic right now. It's been 3 years, starting to feel like a forever war. And there are people within this global governance that will openly say, hey, there's a new world order coming. In the new world order, we have to worry about inequality. We have to worry about the climate. We have to worry about the ever-present threat of pandemics. You better listen to us. We're the experts. We have the expertise. If you don't listen to us, you'll be killed by white supremacists. You'll be killed by bigots. You'll be killed by a pandemic. Take your pick. Listen to us. So, to show you what a glimpse of the future, I found this video. I went back and I pulled this video we're seeing here in China of drones spraying an unidentified mist. There in the cities of the streets of China. Now, this is spooky. This should scare you. Play it again for us. For those of you who are just listening, what we're looking at here is about 5 to 6 drones on what looks like maybe 2 city blocks. 5 to 6 drones that are probably the size of, maybe 2 basketballs, I would say. The size of a basketball, a little bit bigger than a basketball. And these red and green drones are spraying a mist in the streets. I mean, this is totalitarianism. This is the scientific. Can you pull me back up here on the straight down? This is the scientific method. This is the scientific method in democracy coming together to tell you we know best. Not only did the virus that we tampered with, somebody tampered with, I can't say who, I think it's the CCP and Western traders. But not only can we have a tamper with the virus, let the virus leak. Let's just say leak. It leaked. Now we give ourselves the authority to spray stuff on top of you with no consent from you whatsoever because of that danger. And I talked a little bit last episode on Monday about the great contradiction that China represents in people's political worldview around human rights, around rights in general, but especially human rights. And I don't want to have to go and talk about the Uyghurs right now because that would take me 2 hours in and of itself, that contradiction, where black people say human rights, human rights, human rights. But then when we talk about the Uyghurs, or you bring up the Uyghurs, or bring up the fact that we vote for a party that is directly in line with China and their policies and carrying water, especially Joe Biden, they say, oh, the Uyghurs don't care about black people. These are your black sellouts. These are your sellouts. Those people who look at the Uyghurs being put in actual concentration camps, Muslims, Chinese Muslims being put in concentration camps for no other reason than being Muslim, and then turn into their cell phone or the social media comments and saying, yeah, well, the black people, the Uyghurs don't care about black people in America. Why should we care about them? And then the next day, they'll post a quote of Martin Luther King that says, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And you can't square the circle. You don't have any coherence. So I can't follow you. I laugh at you. I just put you on the shelf. Idiot, imbecile, cuck, simp, beta male, brainwashed, sheep. Take your pick. But you don't get a say. And you certainly aren't going to be the one to lead. And there are a lot of you out there. And hey, one with God is a majority. One with the truth is a majority. One with God is a majority. The logos, that which was. In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and God was the Word. Y'all, you burned your Bibles. You burned your Bibles for a morning horoscope handbook. More young men out there living by horoscopes than any time in human history. But the Bible's white supremacy. But you're taking horoscopes from some college kid who's sitting in his dorm room writing up horoscopes as a side gig before his morning gender studies class. You people make me sick. Spit on the floor. This is what's coming from China. This is the future. A drone-based social credit score police state and us signing our rights over to the WHO is the herald. They want to make it seem like this is just some global collaborative that's meant to keep you safe in times of need. No, it's not. No, it's not. This is us in the West showing our affinity for the CCP and totalitarian state policy. And we're going to use the WHO and the pandemic as a conduit and proxy to transfer power from a citizens-based American freedom and individual sovereignty policy or policies or constitution to a global governance. And they're doing it right before your very eyes. And what's worse is they know this isn't an experiment. They know with certainty that they have you so hooked on dopamine and sugar that you won't be able to get your bearings to see what's happened. You won't take the time to stop and say no. You'll just keep voting Democrat. 91%. 91%. You'll just keep voting for the party who's doing this. Why? Because what's the difference? We're black anyway. We have no power. We have no future. All we can hope for is that white people will hand us our freedom. When Malcolm X said the price of freedom is death, there was no merit to that. He's an extremist. He was a little bit more violent. We like the Martin Luther King. We like Martin Luther King. I have a dream. Turn the other cheek. Change will come. Change will come. Yeah, change will come. My grandfather used to tell me, you're going to get everything you want. The question is, do you want everything you're going to get? You're going to get everything you're asking for. But the question is, do you want everything you're going to get? Do you really want it? David Penn talks about your elephant stomach being bigger than your Tweety Bird ass over at the Professor Penn podcast. Go subscribe to the Professor Penn podcast. But your elephant stomach being way bigger than your eyes, your elephant eyes being bigger than your Tweety Bird ass. That's us. We want to be handed freedom. There's no guarantee that freedom is what we envision as freedom. You're going to be handed slavery. You're going to be handed a number and a Line City apartment, if you're lucky. The funny thing is, the people who they're going to give the luxurious Line City apartments to in Saudi Arabia that have high-level security and make sure that all of the post-apocalyptic merchants out there in the desert can't get to. Right, that's Divergent, right? That's the story of Divergent, or what was the other movie that was kind of like Divergent? There was Divergent, Hunger Games, right? Hunger Games, it's kind of, we got you in these little controlled cities, and we're protecting you from the outsiders who are savages and will kill you, which they probably will, because from their lens they know that this was a little power play and that they've had their resources and things stripped from these corrupt elites. And you, by being in this little line city and taking the authority of these corrupt elites, you signed up for it. So you're culpable. You're with them. That's the story of Divergent, right? You're signing up for this. 91%. You're voting Democrat. You're voting for a party that is actively signing over your rights and freedoms to a global governance that you've never even heard of. Most of you didn't even know about the World Health Organization until the pandemic hit. Most of you didn't even know about the World Health Organization until 2020. And now they're talking about signing over your constitutional rights, and they've told you a Marxist story in your university so well that was anti-constitutional, that says the Constitution was a product of white supremacy. You're willing to give your freedom over to a new group of white people? Who do you think started the World Health Organization? Who do you think runs the World Health Organization? Oh, you think because they bring representation from other nations to be the talking heads of the World Health Organization, that represents diversity? You people really believe in that shallow, superficial form of diversity? Because we got Xavier Becerra as the leader or the talking head, the spokesperson for the World Health Organization, that represents genuine diversity? If we bring Jean-Pierre in as the black woman with the natural hair to be the press secretary, right? She's the press secretary for the White House. That represents genuine diversity? Who is she working for? What is the interest she's working in? It's funny how all of the black people who are conservative, are just house Negroes for racist white Republicans. But all of the black people who work for Democrats, they're just working in the interest of a better, more equitable and diverse future. 91%. The Republicans can't count on black people for 91% of anything. They can't even count on black conservative men to be with them 91% of the time. You're the monolith. Black women. I'm tying today into Monday because I think people would go, what does this have to do? What does this global governance have to do with the local? What do black women have to do with the World Health Organization? Well, just go read the charter. Actually, pull up this article. I guarantee they got the word equitable in it. Go back to the World Health Organization treaty. Go back to the Biden administration World Health Organization treaty. It's right there, that left tab. Yep, pull that up for me. Let me just scroll down here. Oh, I mean, the very next paragraph, written under the banner of the world together equitably. February 27th, the workout final terms, which members will then sign, written under the banner of the world, quote unquote, of the world together equitably. The zero draft grants the WHO the power to declare and manage a global pandemic emergency. Once a health emergency is declared, all signatories, including the United States, would submit to the authority of the WHO regarding treatments, government regulations such as lockdowns and vaccine mandates, global supply chains, and monitoring and surveillance of populations. The question of whether an international treaty has the power to dictate domestic policy without lawmakers' approval is a contentious one. Treaties don't override our Constitution, wrote Republican Thomas Massey, Republican representative of Kentucky, on Twitter on February 27th. If a treaty purports to supersede our Constitution, that treaty is unenforceable. Yeah, well, I feel you. Depends on who has the guns. Put me back up here on the up center pipe here. Depends on who has the guns. It should be unenforceable, but we'll see. Joe Biden says in order to fight a tyrannical government, you're going to need F-16s. You better get in line. You better get in line. You better stay in line. That's what we're faced with. 91% Democrat. You guys voted for it. You want to be a slave? You want to live in a lion city? Here it comes. You're about to get your wish. And we'll see. We'll see. And when we get there, listen, because they're going to kill me way before we get to Lion City. Because once we get to Lion City, the next most dangerous thing are revolutionary disruptors, dissidents, right? People who could actually galvanize a rebellion within the Lion City, within the re-education camps. So they're going to clip me way before we ever get there. But when I'm in heaven and I take a peek down to see how things are going, I don't want to see you people complaining and crying and whining and saying, how did this ever happen? We didn't know. Do you guys actually know you are living in a post-World War II democratic liberal order culture, narrative, society, where the Holocaust against the Jews is used to push global governance, and you're actually on the precipice of being put in the camps that were piloted during the Holocaust? Y'all don't know how many Uyghurs are alive or dead. Y'all don't know what they're doing to the Uyghurs. By many reports from within these re-education camps, a lot of Uyghurs are being killed. They're being tortured. They're being kept alive, but tortured, which is even more sadistic. Right? Just kill me. Don't torture me and experiment on me and, just put a bullet in my head. Because there's an afterlife. But when you're anti-God, like the CCP is and many other communists, you would like this, or you would actually think that it's somewhat humane to extend a person's life, even if it's torturous. We're signing it over right now to China. We're giving up the rights of our country to China. And it's not Xi Jinping necessarily. Xi Jinping's playing his own game. They might clip him in the end too, because he's a little bit too unpredictable. He's a little bit too big for his britches. And they'll empower somebody there in China to clip him out too. But it's China at the behest of the Western prevailing power in our society that wants to use China as an engine, weaponize China as an engine. China's the new center of the world. America, managed decline. China, population, strength by numbers, subservience. Very clear. I can't put it any clearer than that. You see the drones spraying mist all throughout the city streets. And I want to show you even more of what China has in store. Let's go back to the Shanghai lockdowns. Let's go back to the zero COVID policy in Shanghai. Now, this is the Guardian. This is the Guardian news. This is the same Guardian. This is the railhead of New World Order news. You got Axios. I mean, that's the intelligence community's railhead of New World Order and Davos. But Guardian News is the mainstream media's version of New World Order politics. These are the same people that wrote a hit piece or tried to write a hit piece on me and running against Ilhan. You can go look that up if you get a chance. This is the Guardian News. The headline read, this verified account on YouTube. Residents in lockdown Shanghai scream from their balconies. Locked down. Everybody's locked down here in Shanghai. And now you got to remember, Shanghai represents the Western connection, remnant China. So within this global jump ball and this sort of, the politics of nation versus nation, but then the politics within a nation, this is President Xi opting for a more nationalist, Chinese, ethno-nationalist based power structure and going after Shanghai, which represented a connection to the old way of Western economy or Western corporation. Shanghai it was the center of the West, the Western tie into China. Beijing is the new head of China, it's the new center of China and the center of a new formation of China-Western connection. Listen to the residents in Shanghai scream from their apartments.
这个是真的来叫啊，好了，终于2万人，所有
This
人
is
都在
real
叫。
screaming. Everyone's screaming. A video of people in Shanghai screaming from their balconies has been widely shared on
就
social
刚刚
media.
5分钟前头，俺叫个没几个了，现在突然之间，所有人都叫了，要死！
Stop. The metropolis of nearly 26 million people has been locked down since late March. This is months and months of being locked down in their apartments. These are, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Shanghai or the way the city is built there in Shanghai. If you haven't, you should go watch this video. But this is like New York City. I mean, this is a super city. Shanghai is a super city. Okay? I mean, how many people live in New York City? 26 million people live in this metropolitan area. 26 million people they had locked down. Do any of us know how many people survived? Do any of us know how many people lived through this lockdown? Do any of us know how many people died in this lockdown?
8.8 million in New York in 2020.
New York City? How about the New York City metro area? It'd be surprising to find out that Shanghai is bigger than New York City. But maybe it is. There are a bunch of these super cities in China.
Looks like 18.9 million.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Shanghai, the metropolitan area of Shanghai is bigger than the metropolitan area of New York City. And there are a bunch of these super cities in China. And if you look at this video, these apartment buildings are skyscrapers. I mean, these are 40 to 30-story tall apartment buildings. And they're all in a row. This looks like a residential area of Shanghai. And these people are on their balconies screaming. They're screaming because they've been locked down by their government. But the Chinese, again, when you understand the history of China and the culture of China, what they have done over a 5,000-year civil war is they've weeded out all of the dissidents. They've created a cultural submission. The Chinese, they have this hive mind. And I don't say that to be xenophobic or racist. There is merit to culture and genetics and the progression of psychological profile and mentality across time. It's the same argument many people would make about slavery and how black people act and how the remnants of slavery have an effect on the prevailing psychology of black people today. The same thing is true of people everywhere. And how people are formed is not only in their lifetime, but it's genetically and it's generationally. And here in China, they've weeded out all the dissidents. They had their civil war, and they've come to a place where the most you're going to get is a population of people, 26 million people who are going to take their orders to stay locked down in their apartments, and the most resistance you'll get from them are the tragic and horrifying screams from their apartment balcony. That's where you're headed. That's where you're headed next. Keep going. Let another generation go by where you allow tyranny and authoritarianism and totalitarianism to rule the day here in this country. And before you know it, 2 generations from now, you won't have to worry about whether or not the air will be clean enough for your child to breathe. You'll have to worry about whether or not your child will even understand what it means to be a slave and to be a prisoner in their own home. Bring me back up down the center pipe, will you? That's what you'll have to worry about next. All of you worried about leaving a planet good enough for our kids to live in, for our kids to inhabit. You people want to be, and part of it is some of you people would rather be slaves. I love when Dr. Cornel West was on Joe Rogan. If you haven't seen this podcast, you should really go and watch it. Dr. Cornel West says in the podcast, some people want to be slaves. Some people want to be prisoners, want to be told what to do. Freedom is good. It tastes good, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. And once somebody gets a taste of it, they go, "Ooh, I like that." But the cowardice is widespread. Cowardice is what is widespread in the human population today. That's why it's so easy for them to paint somebody like me as a conspiracy theorist and a radical or extremist, and you to buy it, you to read the headline and see far right-wing radical extremists forwarded or helped feed the disinformation loop about Paul Pelosi's extra gay marital affair and his attack. You just read that headline and believe it. Not because you give a shit about Paul Pelosi or Nancy Pelosi, or that you give a shit about anyone else. You don't even really give a shit about yourself. And we see that in how much dopamine and sugar you consume. What you give a shit about is the presumption, the preservation, the presumption of truth in the status quo, and the preservation of the corruption in the status quo. And it's usually not until your dying breath that you resign that. And most of you look to God and you pray to God for forgiveness. You pray to God for salvation. And none of us are there usually to be able to see that moment. But we know it exists. We know it exists, Can you bring up the next story, will you? It's where you're headed, China. A little bit of economic news. Mainline Chinese investment in Taiwan hits a 13-year low amid tense political ties. Now, understand, when you see mainline Chinese companies go one way or another in their investments, you're talking about the CCP. The CCP there in China, the government gives the marching orders for Chinese companies. Okay, so when you see that the investment in Taiwan hits a 13-year low, that means that the Taiwan situation is going to come to a head, and people are either getting out, and what this looks like is the Chinese are getting out of Taiwan. And it may be, we can't trust the Chinese. Maybe the Chinese have already copied and taken everything they need from Taiwan's chip manufacturing base. And it could be that the Chinese have already started their own secret underground chip manufacturing there away from Taiwan. We're relying upon Taiwan computer chips. There's no saying that the Chinese are. And we don't have to be in America. We could certainly manufacture our own chips the same way we could manufacture our own antibiotics. And many of your establishment Rhino Republicans are all in on the Taiwan chip train, and they're all in on the American manufacturing could never return and sustain itself going forward. They're all in. No, regardless of what they say in the public, go watch it how they vote legislatively, and you'll see that they're all in. This was the animus against MAGA. It's not about taking America back to a time where black people and white people were more divided on paper in the law. It's about taking America back to a time where we were self-sufficient. A time and a place that we could have and achieve still today. Nothing is stopping us from being self-sufficient except for corporations that are greedy, a corporatocracy that only sees money, and politicians that only know corruption. That's what's keeping the American people from having self-sufficiency. We don't need Taiwan for chips. It's a lie. It's a scam. It's a scam to set us up to fall to China. And it's also a scam for the military-industrial complex to siphon off money as a justification to need to protect Taiwan until we do give over to China, and they throw their hands up and go, I don't know. Well, no, nothing we can do now after they robbed the whole place, after they took everything that wasn't tied down. Your money. That's what this story is telling you. Mainland Chinese investment in Taiwan hits a 13-year low. All-time low of investment in Taiwan from the CCP and the Chinese corporations. Let's go to the next story here. Oh, as a mirror, we go over to Zero Hedge, who some people will say is a far right-wing white supremacy conspiracy site, but he's just giving you the facts. The U.S. bankruptcy filings surge at fastest pace since the last financial crisis of 2009. Bankruptcies at an all-time high. Joe Biden telling you that this isn't a recession. The $1 trillion that we put in for COVID or whatever else, or infrastructure or whatever, you're not gonna feel it. This isn't inflation. Let's put the black woman out there who wears the white woman wig, Joy-Ann Reid. Let's put Joy-Ann Reid out there in a white woman's wig and tell you that inflation is a Republican talking point. There's no inflation. There's nothing wrong with the economy. There's no crisis. Yet the bankruptcy filings surge at fastest pace since 2009. And who did it surge for? He gets specific here. He's not just going to throw it out there just, as some type of generalization. He gets specific. He gets granular. He says that when looking at the people who had $50 million in liabilities, that's where the bankruptcy was at an all-time high since 2009. What does that signal? That signals that the nation of shop, see, we have become such wage slaves. We have become so economically illiterate and in the dark about how economics, macroeconomics work. We've become we have become serfs in such a way that we think of the rich as being the super rich. We think of the wealthy as being the super wealthy. This is an info war played on us. We all want to tax people who make over $325,000, right? That's a big deal. That's a talking point from Joe Biden at the State of the Union address. Anybody who makes over $250,000 a year, we're going to increase taxes on. But who does that really hurt? Does that hurt the corporation who ends up paying no taxes? The corporation that actually ends up paying no taxes, in large part, they have all these tax loops from being a corporation. They pay no taxes, but they still get to control the policy and lobbying for a health crisis when the time comes. Twitter, Google, Apple. You know you're hosting the podcast. I get it. But hey, it is what it is. Truth. They get to decide and determine policy. They still have control. They still have power. They don't have to pay taxes. Who has to pay the taxes? Individual nation of shopkeepers. An individual nation of shopkeepers, the middle market. This is who they're putting the squeeze on. And there's a reason. Because your individual entrepreneurs, your nation of shopkeepers, your people with mom and pop businesses that are American-based, your mom and pop businesses that are American-based are the donor base for the Republican Party. And even more specifically, they're the donor base for the America First movement. And if we strangle all of the independent shopkeepers, if we strangle all the independent entrepreneurs, if we clip out all the mom and pop shops across the nation, all we'll be left with is big box stores. And we're seeing that now. Big box stores and millennials in a gig economy that sell goods third party on Amazon. Amazon's made more millionaires. Look up how many millionaires Amazon has made in the last new Amazon millionaires. Mm-hmm. 10,000 millionaires. 40,000 millionaires. This is December 9th, 2019. This was 4 years ago. This is an e-commerce tech giant taking out the middle market. This is substituting a computer and a job and a mom and pop store, a manufacturer for China manufacturing. Let's just be honest. Most of the stuff on Amazon is coming from China, right? More or less. more or less. I mean, it's leaning towards China. It's gravitating towards China manufacturing. Okay, 40,000 millionaires. And what's the catch here? If you're opting, yes, you're becoming a millionaire, and yeah, that's a good thing to have a sort of economic independence as an individual. But the whole nature or the whole anchor to your financial growth, sustainability, quote unquote, sustainability, the whole foundation of it is you being in on the fourth industrial revolution and e-commerce. You being in on an offshore manufacturing base, right? What does this say? It's Amazon, it's Alibaba, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Sellers based in China represent 47% of new sellers in January 2020 and 41% of new sellers in January 2019. That has more than doubled on Amazon in the U.S. from 28% in 2019 to 63% in 2021. It's going towards China. Amazon is a conduit to China. That it is what it is, okay? They're cutting out the middleman. They're cutting out the middle market. They're cutting out the nation of shopkeepers, and they're using your resent and the narrative around rich people, rich individuals, to cut out the middle market and to give more power to super corporations and the Fed so that they can collectively make a decision to send manufacturing to China, where the authoritarianism and totalitarianism is on a clear path and trajectory to darkness. This is how the global affects the local. This is how corporatocracy will make you a slave. This is how 91% voting Democrat will have you being an employee for Amazon's e-commerce business, where you can only get your money if you believe in the manufacturing of China that will ultimately control the World Health Organization and send down mandates or decrees about vaccine mandates, masks, lockdowns, your freedom of speech. Disconnected. What, you can't follow that? Is that too much for you? Is that off the beaten path? You're voting 91% for a political party that's gravitating towards China. China runs the WHO. They have an imbalanced influence in the WHO. The WHO is now your government. Treaty signed in the last 48 hours. The WHO now is your government, especially under a president or an administration that believes it to be so. Why? Because he's the commander-in-chief of the military. And the military is going to determine what will be considered constitutional and not when global governance really comes to knock on the front door of American citizens. And if the military opts in, then you have a global governance. And your constitutional rights won't matter. All you black people who voted for civil rights, all you LGBTQ people who voted for gay rights, all you feminists who voted for women's rights, the WHO better have those things in mind, because the Chinese don't. The Chinese don't care what you think your rights are. Zero COVID, Shanghai, people locked down for months at a time, screaming at the top of their lungs from their apartment balconies and 50-foot skyscrapers. Only two choices you get. You stay locked down, you do what we tell you, or you can go ahead and hit this balcony and take that plunge into the afterlife. But we've already abnegated you from God for the most part, so chances are you take the plunge over into the afterlife, you're going somewhere worse than here. You're going to hell, and that is a very, very sadistic thing and option to give a person. You listen to us under the terms of slavery, or you go ahead and kill yourself and go to hell. That's what they're doing. I mean, how sadistic could you possibly get? These are the people you're voting for. These are the people you've decided to vote for. And I'm the sellout. I'm the sellout. I'm the coon. No, you people are faithless. You people are faithless, and even more so, faith aside, religion aside. You people are just corrupt morally. Your individual impulse and impetus is towards corruption. You'll take from being, you don't want to be told what to do by any fascist religious authority, any theocracy. I mean, it really becomes clear that the dividing line is religion when you get down into these things. I mean, it really just becomes clear. And we're going to end here very shortly. But it really does become clear just how much the dividing line is around faith and religion and God or anti-God when you talk about these propositions. Because all you weird LGBTQ, purple-haired, beta male, radical feminist, harpy, liberal goofballs preach about how dangerous theocracy is. So you don't want to live under totalitarianism or authoritarian. You don't want to live under the authority of a religious-based government. You don't want to live under the authority of religion and faith. But you're totally willing to live under the authority of the CCP or the World Health Organization. You're totally willing to live under the authority of science, as though science isn't corruptible, as though science isn't more dangerous or more dangerous or more influenceable than religion. I mean, the tenets of religion make themselves very clear. I mean, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, thou shalt not. There's only 10 of them. Not hard to follow. Science, no guardrails. Why? Because most of you don't even know what science, you don't know any science. You have to completely believe in the authority or the perspective of a prevailing expert. You don't know what they're saying. You don't know what's true or not. You're just looking at the New York Times, who's paired in the NIH, who's paired in the World Health Organization, who's paired in all of these backdoor Nazi scientists who came out of Operation Paperclip. You know, these weird Dr. Kevorkian, people. This is who you're following. You have no clue about epidemiology. You're just willing to tell the nearest Republican or supporter of Donald Trump they don't know anything about epidemiology. But neither do you. So how hard is it to keep track of what's actually going on in the scientific technocracy? You don't know what they're spraying out of those drones. Out of your cowardice, you want to believe that what they're spraying on the streets out of their drones is what they say it is. It's actually disinfecting. You mean to tell me that you people are stupid enough to believe that COVID, which initially wasn't even airborne, remember, COVID didn't pass through the air, it passed through physical touch. Remember that? It wasn't an airborne virus. COVID was never an airborne virus. And now the Chinese government is disinfecting the air of COVID? Square the circle for me. Square the circle for me. You know it all, liberals. Just square the circle for me. COVID was not an airborne virus. It was droplets. It was touch. That's why you had to, don't touch your face or your eyes, right? Wash your hands 5 times a day, hand sanitizer, all across America, hand sanitizer. Anywhere you go now, there's hand sanitizer. The hand sanitizer business must be booming. I bet the hand sanitizer comes from China too. Coronavirus was never considered to be airborne. And now the Chinese government is spraying disinfectant. They're disinfecting the air. They're disinfecting the air in the city streets. How are you going to get COVID from the city streets? How on earth are you going to contract coronavirus from the city streets? What? How? Are you going to reach? Are you dropping wontons onto the streets of China and then picking them up and eating them? I mean, what are they even suggesting here? Point is, you don't know what they're spraying out of those. You don't know what they're spraying from the skies here in America. You don't know. Hey, the speed of science. Crisis, the speed of science. We have to match the crisis with the speed of science. Jean-Pierre, black woman, press secretary, came after Jen Psaki. Let Jen Psaki walk her up on stage and pat her on the head and say how great it was to have a LGBTQ black woman as the new press secretary and how historic that was. What a sign of this administration's commitment to progress. And they done progressed you right into the firing line, right into a shooting gallery of global governance. And you're so doubtful, you're so insecure, you're so self-loathing and self-hating that you actually accept this as a gift. I mean, imagine letting a prevailing political elite group take a piss on your head and say thank you. Who's really demeaning you? Who's really objectifying you? You got to be some type of sick pervert to execute this little psyop. Get all black women to believe that they're fat, that being fat is the new cool. Oh, now the Biden administration has brought on an expert who says that being fat is purely genetic. That obesity is purely genetic. Obesity, which is one of the obesity, which was one of the key health factors in adverse or fatal outcomes, mortality rates for COVID-19. Obesity, one of the number one indicators of adverse and serious complications of COVID-19. And now they're going to tell you that being obese is genetic. Don't be born to fat people. The best you can do is not be born to fat people. You have no choice. Basically, they're telling you you're going to die. You're going to die. Don't even pull it up. It's a fact. Yeah. It stopped. I'm glad you pulled it up. What do we have here? Another black woman. And y'all wondering why I went in the way I did on Monday about black women. We couldn't have brought up enough pictures of sellout, traitor, scam black women that are forwarding this bullshit agenda. We could have done the entire episode for 2 hours. I could have brought up picture after picture after picture of black women who are being marched out to the center stage to tell you this bullshit while they're getting pats on the head and golden tickets. Like when the Chinese take over, they're going to make a place for black women. Yeah, you're going to be President Xi's sex doll is what you're going to be. You're going to be sitting in an apartment building that's just designated for President Xi's playtime after he gets done giving the marching orders to spray disinfectant on the entire city. And they're going to be spraying it on your block. But he's going to have his hazmat suit. He's going to be poking you. He's going to be, he's going to be giving it to you through his hazmat suit. If his little cock can clear the space, right? If his little cock can clear the space, then he'll be giving it to you through his hazmat suit. He'll have 100 black women in an apartment building. You'll get your golden ticket. You'll be able to cash it in. You come stand right over here. Your work is done. You told all the American black women that being obese is out of their control. It's purely genetic. It's purely materialism. Color of your skin, who your parents were, where you were born, it's all genetic. Don't work out. It has nothing to do with what you eat. It has nothing to do with the sugar and dopamine. Get ready for death. Get ready for the death camp. You know what? We might not even need to bring you American black women into an actual internment camp or death camp because where you are is a death camp in and of itself. Right there in front of your phone, stuffing your face with gourmet foods that you post about online, full of grease and sugar and all kinds of other processed chemicals that your non-science knowing ass has no clue what you're putting in your body. Not a single clue. Let me see the last story. I don't even know if I want to address the last story. And let me know when we're approaching 120 because this is going to stop at 99. Oh, Mayor Lori Lightfoot clipped her. Great example. The transitions couldn't be any better. I didn't even, I just, these podcasts are extemporaneous. I don't come into here with no plan. I got the stories that we want to talk about, but I'm not rehearsing. This is what genuine leadership looks. This is what genuine thought sounds like. I'm just going from one to the next. I didn't even remember that we put Lori Lightfoot up here. But just like the spirit of wickedness and the impulse of wickedness coalesces and aims in one direction, so does the spirit of righteousness. Lori Lightfoot, they clipped her, got her out of there. Marched her out there, told her all the talking points she needed to speak on. And as soon as it was advantageous for her, they clipped her. Good riddance. She's out of there. She's a sellout. Traitor. We shouldn't have had her in the first place. I'm down. Lori Lightfoot's out. But she was marched out there. She was a puppet from the beginning. And when puppets run their, when puppets run out their utility, you discard them. Toy Story, right? The box of toys that are going to the dump. So where all of y'all are headed. You're headed to the dump. Let me see the next story. Mayor Lori Lightfoot, she's out. Good riddance to her. She's a sellout and a traitor. Oh, here we go. And to end the show, coming back to the most dangerous time in recent American history. Warpath with Russia. On the warpath, in an epic battle of tanks, Russia was routed, repeating earlier mistakes. A 3-week fight in the town of Volodar in southern Ukraine produced what Ukrainian officials say was the biggest tank battle of the war so far and a stinging setback for the Russians. Who knows? Who knows if it's true or not? Who knows? It's only going to be so long that Putin will allow America to send tanks to the Ukraine and claim that they're not involved in the war. It's only going to be so long. Then the nuclear exchange will be the justification for global health emergency and the World Health Organization taking over the policy for America. You see the firing line? You see the shooting gallery that we've marched into? Whether it's nuclear war, whether they set off another pandemic, whether it's UFOs, who knows? Maybe we come into contact with extraterrestrials and then that will be the world health crisis. Who knows? But no matter which way you look at it, they have us pinned in a position where we're going to willingly accept and embrace global governance. And I'm glad that we're having Dr. Scott Jensen on Friday because he's somebody who has been inside this scientific, medical, industrial complex his entire life. And he's going to bring a very authentic and genuine and rebellious perspective on how this entire system works. It's right in line. From the black woman on Monday to the white tyrannical patriarchy on Friday. Dr. Scott Jensen, middle-aged white man, ran against the system. Been a doctor his entire career. All was good. Patting him on the head, singing his praises, giving him awards up until the pandemic, and he sat and he went, hold on, this isn't right. This doesn't make sense. Now he's an extremist and a conspiracy theorist. And you're stupid enough at home to believe that? Now, do I agree with everything Dr. Scott Jensen stands for or all of his politics? No. It's very common that politicians won't agree, even on the same side of the aisle. But I know somebody who spoke a truth that was dangerous and uncomfortable when I see one. And my disagreement with them on some things will not allow me to discount them entirely. That's a fool's errand. I can't wait to have Dr. Scott Jensen in here at Free People Radio and let him tell a story that is most important where, in a preview, Now they're trying to take his medical license. Now, after the governor's race is over, the attorney general and medical boards have circled back around to try and strip him of his medical license. They're going to strip the middle market out of the economy. They're going to strip any dissidents out of the pool of expertise. They're going to do exactly what a 5,000-year war and a 5,000-year civil war in China did. Create the hive mind. Anybody who isn't in the hive mind, you're either going to be in jail or you're going to be in a graveyard. In China, they're still killing people who disagree with Xi. The Uyghurs aside. And the Uyghurs are an interesting one. And first off, free the Uyghurs. Free the Uyghurs. And you black bourgeois woke sellouts who act like you don't understand or know what's going on there in China when it comes to the Uyghurs who want to play dumb. Oh, we got problems in America. Yeah, we got problems in America that you voted for. We got problems in America that you continue to vote for. But don't ever mistake being in a physical in prison and the psychological and philosophical imprisonment that you've embraced on your own. There's a difference between you embracing the circumstance and the standard and the human condition that you willingly voted for and having the government show up and say, you're Muslim, let's go. Big difference. Double-edged InfoWars sword going on there. Oh, you're black, you're oppressed, you're oppressed. Oh, you don't know real oppression yet. This sort of metaphorical slavery that we talk about, 400 years of slavery. No, yeah, there's slavery here. We get it. We get it. First you were slaves, then you were psychologically brainwashed into accepting your slavery and becoming a ward of the welfare state. That's different than somebody showing up to your house and physically under the threat of a gun, marching you to a internment camp. You know the difference. Sellouts. LeBron, Obama, The Rock. Pick one. We could go with Oprah, Stephen A. Smith. Is it by accident that none of you black folks ever speak about China? None of you. None of you will even mention China. None of you mention China. In any conversation about human rights or inclusivity or diversity or freedom or liberty or justice or equality, in none of those conversations do any of you talk about China. Is that a coincidence? There are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences. It's not a coincidence. You know what's going on in China. You've always known. The impulse, the impetus of the wicked and the corrupt aim in one direction. You want China just as much as Joe Biden wants China, and that's exactly why you vote for Joe Biden, to take us under the authority of China. And the Uyghurs are an afterthought. And the black folks who believe in God here in America are an afterthought. Anybody who has any moral clarity or discipline or belief system that they're willing to fight, live, and die for are an afterthought. This ain't about black people. Oh, we all got to get vaccinated. If we don't get vaccinated, COVID affects black people the most because of the disparity of healthcare access. Are you kidding me? But you vote for Obamacare, which is the expansion of a military-industrial complex, but a medical-industrial complex, a medical cartel, where hospitals, insurance companies, and big pharma all conspire to inflate the price of medical services. You know how they handle this in China? If you don't got money to pay, you die in the waiting room at the ER. If you can't pay, you die. Ain't no universal health care in China. Are you people stupid? There is no universal health care in China. If you can't pay, you die. That's it. Which is exactly where you're going to be, which is exactly where we're going to be pretty soon if we continue to let things like Obamacare and the medical industrial complex inflate the price of medical services. But y'all voted for that. Y'all voted for that. See, the free market way And I'm not a shill for the free market, because the free market is kind of how we ended up in China in the first place. But the real free market way is, if there is a medicine that can be created, if there is a medicine that can be created at the lowest cost, which is beneficial to the biggest consumer, then the market will take care of it. And all those other people who are inflating the price, they won't be able to deal. You know what the workaround is you create a monopoly where you can't even manufacture certain medicines without going through certain governing bodies, like the FDA. Hello? Peer review. What did our friend Dr. Pierre Corey talk about? Double-blind peer review, double-blind double-blind randomized control test. That's the golden standard of medication, pharma. You need randomized double-blind control tests, right? But the catch is, the only medicines, the only treatments that get double-blind randomized control tests, which are very expensive, are ones that aim to bring some drug or treatment to market that benefits investors from Big Pharma. So Big Pharma gets to say which things we test and which things we don't. Now, in your mind at home, black person, or any of you, let's say, I use black person because y'all are the linchpin of the whole narrative. You voting Democrat, not rising up to accept your citizenship and bear the responsibility of freedom, is bringing down everybody else. We're the ball and chain of this country right now. Doesn't have to be. We could be the hope and horizon, but right now we're the ball and chain. But any of you, do you really think that Big Pharma, that it would benefit Big Pharma to give you a treatment or a medication that's low cost and efficient? Mr. and Mrs. Get to the bag. Mr. and Mrs. Get your money at all costs. If you were an expert and you could tell somebody that your expertise is undeniable, that is unquestionable, and you're running a business, would you give your consumers the best product at the lowest price if you didn't have to? It wasn't that the danger of capitalism that we all cried about? That we've all been crying about? The dangers of crony capitalism? You're voting for it. Only difference is your capitalism is now a state capitalism run there in Beijing, or run there in Davos, Switzerland, or Geneva, or Brussels. That's the only change that's happened. You've traded your fear of American-based crony capitalism for a global crony capitalism. And now you're going to take directions from the World Health Organization. You people don't even know where the fucking World Health Organization is. If I didn't tell you it was in fucking Geneva, you wouldn't even know. You're going to take direction from the white coats in Europe, in bougie, bourgeois, posh Europe, where they're putting chips in people right now. You're going to take a chip. Your government's tyrannical. The police are a bastion of white supremacy, but you're going to take a chip for a virus that we actually manufacture and mutated. Are you people stupid? That's enough for today. This has been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. I'm your host, Royce White. I appreciate your viewership today and in the future, your listenership today and in the future. Please like and subscribe to the channel. You can find us on all audio and video platforms, major audio and video platforms. If you need help in finding us, go to freepeopleradio.com. There you can see all the places where you can access the content or the podcast. We look forward to Dr. Scott Jensen joining us on Friday and telling his story for our Family and Friends Friday. Thank you again for sitting in on a podcast that went over the 90 minutes. The takeaway is tyranny is here. It's on your doorstep. Globalism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, anti-God, wickedness, corruption, it's here. The World Health Organization is on your doorstep. And your fear is going to be used as a justification to put you in chains. never was intended to be that way. That's not what America was intended to be. That's not how God wanted us to live. We better get clear about this right here, right now. For all of you who continue to support the podcast, I appreciate you. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your feedback. There's so many social media channels out there. If you send me a message or if you send me a comment or some type of, any type of feedback whatsoever, if I miss it and I don't see it and I don't respond, please don't take that as you being insignificant, because you're not insignificant. We are developing a conversation here that I believe is a very important conversation, one of the most important conversations, one of the most authentic and genuine conversations. And we're going to bring guests on that reflect that. And I'm going to continue to cover news and current events that reflect that and talk about the topics that reflect that. And we want you to stick with the conversation and continue to give us your feedback and support. We appreciate it. The fight continues. Godspeed.